A single frustrated kick, a $5,000 suitcase skidding across a polished airport floor, the sound of something priceless shattering within. For Caroline, a senior flight attendant, it was the last straw on the worst day of her life. For Dr. Evelyn Reed, the brilliant CEO standing before her, it was an act of unforgivable disrespect. What followed wasn't a formal complaint or a strongly worded email. It was a single 3-minute phone call that ended a 20-year career on the spot, right there at the boarding gate. But the story doesn't end with a pink slip. It ends with a brutal lesson in karma, a twisted online campaign, and a final shocking confrontation that proves that sometimes the most devastating revenge is a second chance. Before we begin, comment where you are watching from today, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Now, let's get into it. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was a thick soup of anxiety and anticipation. The 10 a.m. Transatlantic Airways Flight 101 to London Heathrow was boarding, and the controlled chaos at Gate C-26 was reaching its peak. It was a symphony of rolling wheels, beeping scanners, and the multilingual murmur of travelers eager to begin their journey. In the priority boarding line for first class stood Dr. Evelyn Reed. To the casual observer, she was just another well-dressed traveler. Her attire was understated elegance, a tailored navy blue blazer, silk shell, and comfortable yet chic trousers. Her hair was styled in intricate micro braids that cascaded over her shoulders, each one a testament to patience and artistry. There was a quiet, powerful stillness about her, a stark contrast to the harried energy of the terminal. At 38, Evelyn was the founder and CEO of Ether Dynamics, a revolutionary climate tech firm that had, in less than a decade, become a global leader in carbon capture technology. She was on her way to London to deliver the keynote address at the World Climate Summit, an event that would cement her company's legacy. She wasn't looking at her phone or lost in thought. She was observing. She saw a young mother struggling to fold a stroller while her toddler made a break for freedom. She noticed the nervous excitement on the faces of a honeymooning couple. This was Evelyn's way. She gathered data not just from spreadsheets but from the world around her. Her success was built on seeing the details others missed. Her carry-on suitcase, a sleek, graphite-colored model from a high-end German brand, stood dutifully by her side. It was a custom piece, engineered to be the maximum possible size for an international carry-on, with reinforced compartments for her sensitive prototypes and presentation materials. It was, like her, efficient, impeccably designed, and pushed the boundaries of the rules without breaking them. Presiding over the boarding process like a queen surveying a slightly disappointing court was Caroline Finch. At 45, Caroline had been a flight attendant for over 2 decades. She had the crisp uniform, the perfectly coiffed blonde hair, and a smile that could switch from professionally pleasant to razor thin in a fraction of a second. Today, it was mostly razor thin. Caroline's day had begun with a 4 a.m. alarm, a fight with her teenage son about his grades, and a notice from her bank about a looming mortgage payment. Her car had coughed and sputtered on the Van Wyck Expressway, making her late and fraying her already raw nerves. The airline had just implemented a new, stricter carry-on baggage policy, and she was the unlucky enforcer on the front lines. For the last hour, she had been arguing with passengers about millimeters, forcing them to cram their overstuffed bags into the unforgiving metal sizer. Each confrontation felt like a personal affront, another drop of acid in her curdling mood. She had just finished a tense standoff with a businessman whose bag was clearly too wide. "Sir, the policy is the policy. You'll have to check it," she'd said, her voice tight with forced politeness. The man had muttered something under his breath about customer service being dead, but he had complied, storming off toward the check-in desk. Caroline felt a bitter sense of victory, but it was hollow. She wasn't winning. She was just fighting a losing battle against a world that felt increasingly hostile and ungrateful. She scanned the line, her eyes seeking the next problem, the next rule breaker. And then they landed on Dr. Evelyn Reed and her perfectly engineered boundary-pushing suitcase. Evelyn stepped forward, presenting her boarding pass with a polite nod. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm and measured. Caroline's eyes bypassed Evelyn's face and went straight to the suitcase. It looked big, a little too perfect, a little too confident. It represented everything that was irritating her today. Entitled people with their expensive things, thinking the rules didn't apply to them. "Good morning," Caroline replied, her tone clipped. "I'm going to need you to place your bag in the sizer." Evelyn's pleasant expression didn't falter. "Of course, though I can assure you it fits. It was custom-made to the exact specifications." The phrase custom-made was like a lit match to Caroline. Of course it was. "We'll be the judge of that. Please place it in the sizer." She gestured toward the metal cage of compliance, her arm rigid. A few people in the line behind them shuffled their feet, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. The hum of the terminal seemed to fade slightly as a small, invisible stage was set. Evelyn, ever the pragmatist, saw no point in arguing. She calmly lifted her suitcase and guided it toward the sizer. It was a snug fit. The wheels had to be angled just so, and the handle had to be perfectly flush, but it slid in. The top of the suitcase was perfectly level with the top of the metal frame. It complied, barely. "There you are," Evelyn said, her voice still even. "As I said, it fits." She went to pull it out, but the snug fit made it stick for a moment. To Caroline, who was watching with narrowed eyes, this wasn't compliance. This was a deliberate act of defiance. The bag didn't just fit, it had to be forced. It was a mockery of the rule. Her frayed patience, worn thin by the mortgage notice and the traffic and the endless stream of difficult passengers, finally snapped. "That's not fitting, that's forcing," Caroline snapped, her voice rising in volume. "It's clearly too big. You're holding up the line. Take it out. It needs to be checked." "I'm sorry, but you're mistaken," Evelyn said, her politeness now imbued with a spine of steel. She gave the bag a firm tug and it slid free. "It fits the sizer, and therefore it is compliant with the carry-on policy. I won't be checking it." She placed the suitcase back on the floor, ready to proceed to the jet bridge. But Caroline stepped directly in her path, blocking her way. Her face was flushed, her professional mask completely gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated frustration. "No. You people are all the same. You waltz in here with your fancy luggage and your first-class tickets and think you're above the rules." She spat, her voice now loud enough to turn heads from 20 feet away. "That bag is a problem, and you are not getting on this plane with it." Evelyn stood her ground, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Caroline's unraveling composure. "There is no need for this kind of language. The bag is compliant. You are being unprofessional." The word unprofessional was the final spark. To Caroline, it was the ultimate insult from a woman who had no idea what her day had been like, what her life was like. In that moment, Evelyn wasn't a person. She was the embodiment of all her problems. And that's when she did it. With a sharp, angry exhalation, Caroline drew back her foot, shod in a sensible but sturdy black pump, and kicked the corner of the graphite suitcase. It wasn't a gentle nudge. It was a hard, vicious kick, fueled by a morning of misery and a lifetime of feeling overlooked. The suitcase, designed for smooth rolling, shot across the polished linoleum floor, skidding a good 10 feet before it collided with the metal base of a stanchion with a sickening crack. The world at gate C-26 went silent. The beeping, the rolling, the murmuring. It all stopped. Every eye was fixed on the scene. The furious flight attendant, the shockingly still CEO, and the expensive suitcase lying on its side, a visible fracture line now marring its perfect graphite shell. The silence that followed the kick was heavy and absolute. It was broken only by the faint, tinny sound of a boarding announcement from a distant gate. For a moment, no one moved. Caroline stood frozen, her chest heaving, a look of shocked realization dawning on her face as the adrenaline of her rage began to recede, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The sound of the crack had been louder than she'd expected. Evelyn Reed did not gasp. She did not yell. Her expression remained unnervingly placid, but her eyes, which had been calm and observant just moments before, now held a focus so intense it was almost terrifying. She slowly turned her head from her damaged suitcase back to Caroline. The temperature around them seemed to drop by 10 degrees. From inside the fractured suitcase, a soft, crystalline tinkling could be heard as a broken object shifted within. That sound seemed to finally break the spell. A passenger behind Evelyn whispered, "Oh my God, did you see that?" Another pulled out their phone, not to record, but to pretend to be busy, averting their gaze from the sheer awkwardness of the moment. Evelyn walked calmly to her case. She knelt down, her movements fluid and deliberate, and unzipped the main compartment. The fracture had gone clean through the composite shell. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, lay the shattered remains of the Global Innovator for Sustainability Award. It was a delicate, intricate sculpture of recycled glass, a one-of-a-kind piece she was meant to be formally presented with after her keynote speech in London. The conference organizers had shipped it to her New York office ahead of time for security. It was now a pile of sparkling, worthless shards. She looked at the broken glass, then slowly closed the lid of the suitcase. She stood up, her composure absolute. She took out her phone. Caroline watched, her heart pounding against her ribs. She expected shouting, a demand to see a manager, a threat of a lawsuit. That she could handle. She had been trained for de-escalation. But this silent, surgical calmness was something else entirely. It was alien and deeply unsettling. "What are you doing?" Caroline asked, her voice a strained whisper. Evelyn didn't answer. She swiped through her contacts and pressed a name. She held the phone to her ear. It rang once. "Robert, good morning. It's Evelyn Reed," she said, her voice perfectly level, as if she were inquiring about the weather. A few feet away, the junior gate agent, a young man named David, looked on in horror. He recognized the name Robert Chen, the CEO of Transatlantic Airways. He'd seen him on corporate training videos. The idea that a passenger had the CEO's personal number was unfathomable. Caroline's blood ran cold. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a bluff. "I'm well, thank you." Evelyn continued into the phone, her eyes locked on Caroline's. "I'm afraid I'm calling about an issue. I'm at JFK, Gate C-26 for your 10 a.m. flight to Heathrow. Our companies are currently finalizing the renewal of our 7-figure corporate travel contract, correct?" There was a pause. Evelyn's expression didn't change. "Excellent. I just wanted to let you know that I am reconsidering that contract, effective immediately. One of your senior staff members has just physically assaulted my property and, in doing so, destroyed a rather irreplaceable item. But more importantly, she has created a hostile and unprofessional environment that I have to question whether I want my 500-plus employees ever subjected to." Caroline felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. 7 figures. 500 employees. She had picked a fight with the wrong person on a scale she couldn't even comprehend. This wasn't a business traveler. This was a client. A titan. "No, Robert. I don't want to speak to a manager," Evelyn said calmly. "Managers are for problems. This has now escalated to a crisis. Your brand is at stake. The incident occurred approximately 90 seconds ago. You have another 90 seconds to rectify it to my satisfaction, or I will be walking away from this gate, and my chief counsel will be in touch with yours before my car even reaches the city. The choice is yours." She lowered the phone. She didn't hang up. She simply held it by her side, the line still open to the CEO of the airline. The countdown had begun. The effect was instantaneous. A crackle came through the junior agent David's earpiece. His eyes widened. He began speaking into his wrist microphone in hushed, frantic tones. Caroline could only stare at Evelyn, her mind a maelstrom of panic and disbelief. "You can't do this," she stammered. "It was a mistake. I'm having a bad day." "A bad day does not give you the right to assault a passenger or their belongings," Evelyn replied, her voice devoid of any emotion. "You represent this airline, and the representation I just witnessed was appalling." Suddenly, a side door to the jet bridge burst open. A man in a sharp suit, the airport's head of operations for Transatlantic, came striding through. his face pale and beaded with sweat. He was followed by the flight's captain, a distinguished man with silvering temples, his expression grim. "Dr. Reed," the operations head said, his voice breathless. "I'm Mark Jennings. I am so terribly sorry. We were just informed." He had clearly been sprinted from his office. He didn't even glance at Caroline. His entire focus was on Evelyn. Evelyn simply held up her phone where the call timer read 2:47. "You have 13 seconds, Mark." Mark Jennings didn't hesitate. He turned to Caroline. The look in his eyes was not one of anger, but of cold clinical necessity. This was damage control at its most brutal. "Caroline Finch," he said, his voice loud and clear, ringing through the now silent gate area. "Your employment with Transatlantic Airways is terminated, effective immediately. Hand over your badge and your airport credentials to Captain Davies." The captain stepped forward, his hand outstretched, his face a mask of regretful duty. The world stopped for Caroline. Terminated, fired. Not in an office, not after a review, but here, on the floor, in front of dozens of passengers and her colleagues, after 22 years of service, for kicking a suitcase. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the lanyard around her neck. She unclipped her ID badge, the one with her smiling 20-something face on it from when she first started, and placed it in the captain's palm. It felt like she was handing over her entire life. "Please escort Miss Finch to HR for her exit processing," Mark said to the junior agent David, who looked like he was about to be sick. Evelyn raised her phone back to her ear. The timer read 2:59. "Robert," she said, her voice as smooth as polished stone. "Thank you. That will suffice for now. I'll expect a full written report and an apology from your board by the time I land. I trust our contract negotiations can proceed." She hung up. The entire event, from the moment she made the call to the moment Caroline's career ended, had taken less than 3 minutes. As David, the young agent, gently guided a shell-shocked Caroline toward a staff-only door, she looked back at Evelyn Reed one last time. It wasn't a look of remorse or anger. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, a promise of a debt that would one day be repaid. Evelyn watched her go, her face an unreadable mask. She then turned to Mark Jennings. "Now," she said calmly, "about my damaged property and my flight to London." The transition from the public humiliation at the gate to the hushed sanctuary of the first-class cabin was jarring. For Evelyn, it was like stepping through a portal into another world. Mark Jennings had personally escorted her onto the plane, profusely apologizing every step of the way. He'd insisted on taking her damaged suitcase himself, promising it would be handled by a special team and that the airline would replace it and compensate her for the award, a task he knew was impossible. The purser, a woman named Maria who had witnessed the tail end of the incident from the aircraft door, greeted Evelyn with a look of reverential fear. "Dr. Reed, welcome aboard. Please allow me. Can I get you a glass of champagne, water, anything at all?" "Water would be lovely, thank you," Evelyn replied, her voice betraying none of the turmoil she felt. She settled into her seat, 1A, a private suite with a closing door. As the cabin crew bustled around, attending to other passengers with forced, brittle smiles, Evelyn could feel the whispers. The story had already spread through the plane like wildfire. She was the CEO who got a flight attendant fired. To some, she was a hero of customer service. To others, she was a heartless corporate monster. She knew how the optics looked. A powerful, wealthy black woman in first class ending the career of a working-class white woman over a piece of luggage. It was a narrative ripe for misinterpretation, and she knew, with a sinking feeling, that the full context, the aggression, the vitriol, the kick, would be the first casualty of the retelling. As the plane taxied and took off, soaring above the clouds into the brilliant blue sky, Evelyn couldn't shake the image of Caroline Finch's face. The hatred in her eyes had been primal. Evelyn was a problem solver by nature. She dealt with complex equations, market fluctuations, and engineering challenges. Human volatility was a variable she preferred to avoid. Had she done the right thing? Professionally, yes. Caroline's behavior was a liability. It was aggressive, unstable, and a clear violation of company policy. Allowing it to stand would have been an endorsement of terrible service, not just for herself, but for any future passenger who didn't have the leverage to make a 3-minute phone call to the CEO. She had protected her employees from having to fly with a company that tolerated such conduct. But personally, a woman had lost her livelihood in a matter of moments. Evelyn had wielded her power like a weapon, swift and devastating. There was no hearing, no review, no second chance. It felt disproportionate. The image of the shattered glass award in her suitcase felt symbolic. She had won the battle, but something precious had been broken in the process. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on her upcoming speech, but her mind kept drifting back to the gate. She had built her company, Ether Dynamics, on a foundation of ethical principles and second chances. They ran programs to hire and retrain former convicts. They invested in community outreach and education. She championed the idea that people were more than their worst mistakes. And yet, she had just acted as judge, jury, and executioner. The 7-hour flight passed in a blur. Evelyn barely touched her gourmet meal and politely declined the wine pairing. She stared out the window at the endless expanse of clouds, feeling an isolating sense of unease. The ghost of Caroline Finch sat in the empty seat beside her. Upon landing at Heathrow, she was met at the jet bridge by another team of airline executives, including the senior vice president of European operations. The apologies continued. A car was waiting. Her hotel suite had been upgraded. Flowers had been sent. The corporate machine was working overtime to appease her, but it all felt hollow. 3 days later, after a successful keynote speech where she spoke passionately about building a more sustainable and compassionate future, she returned to New York. In her office, 2 things were waiting for her. The first was a formal, groveling letter of apology from the Transatlantic Airways Board. The second was a brand new, top-of-the-line suitcase, identical to her old one, with a check inside for $25,000. A laughably arbitrary number meant to cover the value of her custom award. She told her assistant to donate the money to a local food bank. She put the new suitcase in a storage closet. She didn't want it. Every time she looked at it, she would be reminded of the crack, the shattered glass, and the hatred in a stranger's eyes. She tried to put the incident behind her, to bury it under the weight of work and responsibility. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this story wasn't over. It was just the end of the first chapter. A year went by. Ether Dynamics thrived, launching a groundbreaking new carbon capture facility in Iceland. Evelyn Reed's profile rose, with features in Forbes and Time magazine celebrating her as a visionary leader. The incident at JFK faded into a distant, unpleasant memory, a minor footnote in a life of major achievements. For Caroline Finch, that year was a descent into hell. Being fired so publicly had made her radioactive in the airline industry. No major carrier would touch her. The union had tried to fight for her, but when eyewitness accounts from other passengers and the junior gate agent all confirmed that she had physically kicked a passenger's bag in an unprovoked fit of anger, their case collapsed. She was on her own. Her savings dwindled. The mortgage payments she had been stressing over became impossible to meet. The bank foreclosed on her modest suburban home. Her son, resentful and angry, went to live with his father. Within 6 months, Caroline had lost her career, her house, and her family. She was 46 years old, working double shifts as a waitress in a drab, greasy spoon diner in Queens, earning minimum wage plus whatever meager tips she could gather. The shame and humiliation curdled into a thick, toxic bitterness. In her mind, the events had been rewritten. The kick was no longer a moment of inexcusable aggression. It was a small nudge, a tap, an accident. Evelyn Reed was no longer a calm passenger defending her rights. She was a cruel, arrogant billionaire who had used her immense power to crush a working woman for sport. Caroline became the victim, the martyr. It was during a late-night shift, scrolling through social media on her cracked phone, that the idea took root. She saw stories of online fundraising for people who had suffered injustice. She saw how narratives could be shaped, how public opinion could be mobilized with a well-told emotional story. She created a new online identity. She couldn't use her real name, so she became Kathy Peterson. She chose a softer, more sympathetic-sounding name. She found a generic-looking stock photo of a woman who looked kind and slightly weary. And then she began to write. She started a blog called The Forgotten Worker and a corresponding GoFundMe page titled Help Kathy Rebuild Her Life. Her first post was a masterpiece of manipulative storytelling. 1 year ago today, my life was destroyed by a 1% CEO. In painstaking, fictionalized detail, she described a 22-year unblemished career filled with smiling passengers and medical emergencies where she had supposedly saved lives. She painted a picture of herself as a dedicated single mother working tirelessly to make ends meet. Then she described the incident at JFK. She wrote that Dr. Evelyn Reed, whom she named explicitly, knowing it would add a jolt of reality and draw more attention, had arrived late, demanding special treatment. She claimed the suitcase was egregiously oversized and a safety hazard. She wrote that she had politely asked Evelyn to check the bag, and Evelyn had flown into a rage, screaming at her, calling her names. In Caroline's version, she had merely gestured towards the bag with her foot to move it aside, and it had accidentally tipped over. The phone call to the CEO was portrayed as a cold, calculated act of corporate violence. In 3 minutes, she wrote, this powerful woman who probably makes more in an hour than I made in a year snapped her fingers and erased my entire existence. I was frog-marched out of the airport like a criminal, all because I tried to enforce a simple safety rule. Where is the justice for the little guy? Who stands up for us when the corporate elites decide we are disposable? The story was potent. It tapped into a very real and very raw vein of public anger about income inequality and corporate power. It was the working-class hero versus the out-of-touch, private jet-flying CEO. The post went viral. It was picked up by a few fringe blogs, then by a popular populist podcaster. Soon, #Justice for Kathy was trending on Twitter. The GoFundMe page exploded. Donations poured in. $10 from a truck driver in Ohio, $20 from a teacher in California, $5 from a student in the UK. People shared her story with comments like, "This is what's wrong with our country," and "disgusting. Boycott Ether Dynamics and Transatlantic Airways." Caroline, now Kathy the Courageous to her online followers, watched the numbers climb. $10,000, then $50,000, then past $100,000. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. But it wasn't just about the money. It was the validation. Thousands of people believed her. They saw her as a hero. The intoxicating rush of public sympathy was more addictive than any drug. The narrative she had created began to feel real, more real than the actual memory of her own rage at Gate C-26. She started giving anonymous interviews to friendly bloggers, embellishing the story further with each telling. Evelyn became more villainous. The kick became softer, her own situation more tragic. Back at the gleaming headquarters of Ether Dynamics, the communications team started to notice. The social media mentions of Evelyn Reed's name, usually associated with climate innovation and leadership, were now being flooded with vitriol. Threats and hateful comments appeared on her official accounts. The company's stock, while not seriously damaged, took a noticeable dip as the story was picked up by more mainstream, albeit highly partisan news outlets. Evelyn was briefed by her head of communications, a sharp woman named Lena. "We have a problem," Lena said, showing Evelyn the blog posts, the trending hashtags, the vile comments. "It's a complete fabrication, but it's effective. This Kathy Peterson is painting you as a monster." Evelyn read the blog post, her face impassive. She saw the twisted version of events, the lies woven so seamlessly with threads of truth. She wasn't angry. She was fascinated by the sheer power of a narrative to reshape reality. "What do you suggest?" Evelyn asked. "Legal action. A cease and desist for defamation. We can get the blog and the GoFundMe taken down. We issue a strong public statement setting the record straight. We control the narrative. Lena said, her voice full of conviction. Evelyn stared at the screen, at the picture of the fake Kathy. She thought for a long moment. A legal battle would be messy and public. It would involve dragging witnesses back into the spotlight. It would mean fighting on her opponent's chosen battlefield, the court of public opinion. No, Evelyn said finally, a decision forming in her mind. Not yet. A public fight will only feed the fire and make her look more like a victim. I want to know who she is. I want to know everything. Find the real person behind Kathy Peterson. Find Caroline Finch. She wasn't interested in a public relations war. She was interested in the truth, and she had a feeling that the truth in its entirety would be far more powerful than any press release. The Ether Dynamics corporate security team was not your average group of retired cops. It was a discreet and highly efficient unit of former intelligence analysts and digital forensics experts. Finding the real person behind Kathy Peterson was not a challenge. It was a routine exercise. Within 48 hours, Evelyn had a complete dossier on her desk. It detailed Caroline Finch's life post-termination, the foreclosure, the job at the Starlight Diner in Queens, the estranged family. It also included forensic data linking the Kathy Peterson accounts directly to an IP address that geolocated to a small, run-down apartment above a laundromat, Caroline's current residence. The dossier painted a picture of a life in freefall, but it was the next section of the report that made Evelyn lean forward. Her team hadn't just looked into Caroline. They had reinvestigated the original incident. They had filed a formal request with the Port Authority for all security camera footage from the vicinity of Gate C-26 on that day. The primary overhead camera had captured the event, but the angle was wide and the quality was grainy. It showed the confrontation, the kick, and the suitcase sliding, but it lacked the intimate, damning detail. It could, if one were so inclined, be interpreted as ambiguous, but her team hadn't stopped there. They had cross-referenced the flight manifest with social media activity. They searched for any public posts, photos, or videos tagged at JFK Terminal 4 on that date and time, and they found it. It was on the Instagram page of a 19-year-old travel vlogger from Brazil named Marco. He had been on his way to London for a semester abroad and had been filming his airport experience for his vlog. He hadn't posted this particular clip because the drama was in Portuguese, and he thought it wouldn't interest his followers. But he had never deleted the raw footage from his phone's cloud backup. Evelyn's team reached out to Marco, and for a modest fee, he was happy to provide them with the original high-definition video file. Lena played the video on the large monitor in Evelyn's office. The quality was startlingly clear. Marco had been standing just a few feet away, filming himself talking, with the boarding area visible over his shoulder. He had turned the camera around just as the confrontation began. The video showed everything. It showed Evelyn's calm, patient demeanor. It captured her clear, polite words. "I can assure you it fits." It showed the suitcase sliding perfectly into the sizer. Then it captured Caroline's response. The audio was crystal clear. Her voice, sharp and laced with anger. "That's not fitting. That's forcing. It's clearly too big." The video captured her stepping in front of Evelyn, her body language aggressive. It caught every word of her tirade. "You people are all the same. You waltz in here with your fancy luggage." And then, it showed the kick. In high-definition, slow-motion clarity, the video showed Caroline drawing her foot back and striking the suitcase with undeniable force and intent. It was not a nudge. It was not a tap. It was a violent, angry act. The sound of the impact, the skid across the floor, the loud crack as it hit the stanchion. It was all there. The horrified gasps of the surrounding passengers were audible. The video was a silver bullet. It didn't just refute Caroline's story, it annihilated it. It exposed her entire Kathy the Courageous persona as a calculated, malicious lie. "This is it," Lena said, her voice triumphant. "We release this and it's over. Her GoFundMe will be shut down for fraud. Her credibility will be vaporized. You'll be completely vindicated." Evelyn watched the video a second time. She saw the rage on Caroline's face, but this time, underneath it, she saw something else. Desperation. She saw a woman at the absolute end of her rope. A woman whose life was so filled with pressure that she had exploded in the most unprofessional way imaginable. And now, that same desperation was fueling this online campaign of lies. Releasing the video would be justice. It would be a public execution of Caroline's false narrative. It would feel good. But as Evelyn looked at the desperate, angry woman on the screen, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt a profound sense of sadness. Ruining this woman, even more than she had already ruined herself, suddenly felt like a hollow victory. Destroying a person so completely seemed to serve no constructive purpose. It was just more destruction. "No," Evelyn said quietly. Lena stared at her baffled. "No, Evelyn, this is a gift from the PR gods. This exonerates you completely." "Vindication is not the goal here, Lena," Evelyn said, turning away from the screen. "The goal is to solve the problem. The problem is not a viral blog post. The problem is that this woman's life has been consumed by her hatred for me, and now she is trying to consume my reputation with it. Releasing this video is like pouring gasoline on the fire. She becomes a national pariah, more desperate, with nothing left to lose. What do you think she does then?" Evelyn's mind was already working, connecting data points, analyzing variables, just as she would with a failing carbon converter. The public campaign was a symptom. The disease was Caroline Finch's despair. A public counterattack would only treat the symptom. Evelyn wanted to cure the disease. "Keep the video private," Evelyn commanded. "It's our insurance policy. For now, I want to move to the next phase. The harassment is escalating. Her online followers are getting more aggressive. It's time to draw a line." Just then, an urgent email pinged on Evelyn's desktop. It was from her head of security. A protester, a woman matching Caroline Finch's description, had been spotted outside the gates of Evelyn's private home in upstate New York. She was holding a handmade sign that read, "Evelyn Reed destroys working families." The campaign was no longer just online. It had just crossed over into the real world. Caroline Finch had brought the war to her doorstep. Evelyn looked at Lena, her expression hardening. "All right, the strategy just changed. She's escalated, so will we. But we're still gonna do it my way." The Starlight Diner was a relic of a bygone era, a long, narrow railcar-style establishment with cracked red vinyl booths and a formica countertop worn smooth by decades of weary elbows. The air hung thick with the smell of stale coffee and hot grease. It was the last place on earth anyone would expect to see a CEO worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, during the quiet lull between the lunch and dinner rushes, Evelyn Reed pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. She was dressed down in dark jeans, a simple cashmere sweater, and a baseball cap pulled low, but her innate aura of poise and confidence was unmistakable. She slid into a booth at the far end of the diner, the one with a clear view of the entire counter. There were only 2 other people in the diner, a grizzled old man nursing a cup of coffee and the waitress behind the counter. It was Caroline Finch. She looked older than she had a year ago. The diner's harsh fluorescent lights were unkind, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes and the new lines of stress etched around her mouth. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple, functional ponytail. The crisp, authoritative uniform of a senior flight attendant had been replaced by a cheap, pale blue polyester dress, stained with a fresh splash of ketchup near the hem. She was wiping down the counter with a damp cloth, her movements slow and tired. She hadn't noticed Evelyn yet. Evelyn sat and waited. She needed to understand the environment, to see the reality of the woman who had become her online tormentor. This diner, this drudgery, this was the crucible in which the Kathy the Courageous narrative had been forged. After a few minutes, Caroline finally saw her. She picked up a menu and a glass of water and walked over, her face set in a look of professional weariness. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice flat and monotone as she placed the menu on the table. She didn't look Evelyn in the face. "I'll just have a coffee, thank you," Evelyn said. At the sound of her voice, Caroline froze. It was a voice she had replayed in her nightmares 1,000 times. Calm, controlled, and dripping with power. Her head snapped up. Her eyes met Evelyn's. Recognition dawned, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated shock. Caroline's face went white. The glass of water slipped from her trembling hand, shattering on the tiled floor and splashing water and ice across Evelyn's shoes. "You," Caroline breathed, her voice a strangled whisper. "What are you doing here?" The old man at the counter looked over, annoyed by the commotion. "We need to talk, Caroline," Evelyn said, her voice quiet but firm. She didn't flinch at the spilled water. "I have nothing to say to you," Caroline hissed, her shock quickly morphing into the familiar comfort of rage. "Get out. You're not welcome here. I'll call the cops." "And tell them what? That a customer is sitting peacefully in your establishment?" Evelyn countered. She reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone, placing it on the table between them. "I think you'll want to hear what I have to say, and see what I have to show you." Caroline's eyes darted between Evelyn's face and the phone, her mind racing. Was this a threat? A trap? The owner of the diner was out for the afternoon. She was alone. The rage battled with a primal sense of fear. Evelyn, sensing her hesitation, said, "Please, Caroline, just 5 minutes, no yelling, no accusations, just a conversation." Hesitantly, as if being drawn in by a magnetic force she couldn't resist, Caroline slid into the opposite side of the booth. She crossed her arms over her chest, a shield of defiance. "5 minutes," she said through gritted teeth. Evelyn didn't speak. She simply tapped the screen of her phone, and the video from the vlogger began to play. Caroline watched, her defiant expression slowly crumbling. She saw the scene play out exactly as it had happened, not as she had rewritten it. She saw her own contorted, angry face. She heard her own sharp, vitriolic words. And she saw the kick. Not a tap, not a nudge. A full-blown, aggressive kick. The raw, unvarnished truth of her actions played out in high-definition silence in the middle of a greasy spoon diner. When the video ended, Evelyn turned the screen off. The silence that filled the diner was heavier than before. Caroline was no longer looking at Evelyn. She was staring at her own reflection in the black screen of the phone, and she didn't seem to recognize the person looking back. "That video has not been seen by anyone but me and my security team," Evelyn said softly. "I could have released it the moment your blog went viral. I could have sent it to every news outlet that quoted your story. I could have destroyed your Kathy the Courageous persona and exposed you as a liar and a fraud to the thousands of people who donated to you. I could have had you charged with wire fraud. I could have done all of that." Caroline finally looked up, her eyes swimming with a confusing mix of fear and shame. "Why didn't you?" she whispered. "Because that wasn't the point," Evelyn replied. "The point is that you made a terrible mistake a year ago. A career-ending mistake, and instead of dealing with it, instead of trying to move on, you chose to build a new life based on a lie that required you to make me a monster. You've spent a year consumed by hate, Caroline, and it brought you here to this diner while I continued to build my company. It led you to picket outside my home. Tell me, who is really winning here?" Tears began to well in Caroline's eyes. Tears of frustration and self-pity, and for the first time, a glimmer of genuine remorse. "You don't understand," she choked out. "You took everything from me. My job, my house. I didn't take anything from you," Evelyn interrupted, her voice still quiet but now holding an edge of command. "Your actions at that gate took your job. The consequences of those actions led to everything else. I was just the catalyst. The reaction was all yours. And this campaign," she gestured around the drab diner, "this is the result." Evelyn leaned forward slightly. "So now we come to the hard part. The part where this ends. You've brought this fight to my front door. My patience for your victim narrative is gone, so I am going to give you 2 choices." Caroline stared at Evelyn, her mind reeling. She felt stripped bare, her carefully constructed fortress of victimhood demolished by a 2-minute video clip. Choices. The last time she'd had a real choice was at Gate C-26, and she had chosen anger. Choice 1, Evelyn continued, her voice clinical and precise, laying out the variables of an equation. You do nothing. You walk away from this booth and I walk out that door. And tomorrow morning my legal team will file a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against you for defamation and harassment. I will release the video to the public. I will contact the administrators of your GoFundMe page and provide them with evidence of fraud. They will likely press charges. The media storm will be immense. You will be publicly disgraced. You will be financially ruined for the rest of your life, and you will, in all likelihood, face jail time. Your life, as you know it, will be over. For good. Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling any hope Caroline had left. She could see it all playing out, the news headlines, the public shame, the cold reality of a prison cell. It was the absolute rock bottom she had been careening towards for a year. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. And choice 2? She asked, her voice barely audible. Evelyn's expression softened almost imperceptibly. The hard edge in her voice was replaced by something else, something Caroline couldn't identify. It wasn't pity. It was possibility. Choice 2, Evelyn said, is that you stop, today, right now. You take down the blog, you close the GoFundMe page and return the money. For any funds you've already spent, my foundation will quietly cover the reimbursements to the donors so that no one is at a loss. You will issue a single, simple public statement on your blog saying you are ending your campaign for personal reasons and wish to move on with your life. You will delete the Kathy Peterson persona from the internet, and you will never contact me, my company, or my family ever again. Caroline blinked. That was it? Just stop? It seemed too simple, too easy. And what happens to me? She asked, the unspoken question hanging in the air. And then do you leave me to rot in this diner forever? This was the moment, the true karma. It wasn't about punishment. It was about the lesson. What happens to you, Evelyn said, leaning back in the booth, is where things get interesting. My company, Ether Dynamics, sponsors a vocational retraining program. We call it the Phoenix Initiative. We fund it for people who need a true second chance, ex-convicts, people recovering from addiction, individuals whose industries have left them behind. It provides education, job skills training, and placement in new careers, in tech, in logistics, in administration, careers with a future. She paused, letting the words sink in. If you accept choice 2, I will personally enroll you in that program. We will pay for your education. We will help you find a new career, a new purpose. Away from the public, away from airlines, away from a past you clearly need to escape. I will give you the tools to rebuild your life. A real life, not one built on lies and bitterness. Caroline was stunned into silence. She was being offered not a reprieve, but a rescue. A lifeline thrown by the very person she had spent a year trying to destroy. It was an act of grace so unexpected, so completely illogical that her mind couldn't process it. Why? Why would this powerful woman whom she had slandered and stalked offer her redemption instead of ruin? Why? Caroline finally whispered, the question raw with confusion. Why would you do that for me? Ooh. Evelyn looked out the diner window for a moment before answering. Because, Caroline, releasing that video and destroying you would achieve nothing. It would just create more wreckage. My business is about building better, more sustainable systems for the future. That applies to more than just climate technology. It applies to people, too. You are a broken system. I'm offering you a chance to be rebuilt into something better, something that works. She stood up, her presence seeming to fill the small diner. The choice is yours. My personal assistance card is on the table. If you choose option 2, call her by 5 o'clock tomorrow. She'll handle everything. If I don't hear from you, well, my lawyers will be in touch. Without another word, Evelyn Reed turned and walked out of the Starlight Diner, leaving Caroline Finch alone in the booth with 2 possible futures laid out before her on a sticky Formica tabletop. For the first time in a year, Caroline cried. Not tears of rage or self-pity, but tears of overwhelming, painful, and cathartic release. The hard karma hadn't been the foreclosure, the loneliness, or the greasy diner. The hard karma was this: being forced to look at the ugliness of her own hatred in the mirror, and then having the person she hated most offer her a way out. It was the crushing weight of an undeserved second chance. The next day, at 4:59 p.m., Caroline Finch made a phone call. The Forgotten Worker blog disappeared from the internet, and the story of Kathy the Courageous vanished, as if it had never been. A new, much harder, and much more hopeful story was about to begin. So what is real karma? Is it the simple, satisfying punishment we see in movies, where the villain gets their just desserts? Or is it something more complex, more profound? The story of Evelyn Reed and Caroline Finch suggests that true karma isn't just about consequences, it's about confrontation. It's the unavoidable moment when you are forced to face the person you have become. For Caroline, the ultimate reckoning wasn't losing her job. It was being offered a hand up by the very person she tried to pull down. It was a lesson not in retribution, but in the crushing, transformative power of unexpected grace. If this story of high-stakes drama, brutal consequences, and the complicated nature of justice resonated with you, show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with a friend who appreciates a story that makes you think. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell, so you won't miss our next dive into stories where life is stranger and more meaningful than fiction.